Are you really sure that one day you will simply disappear? That at some moment everything will go dark, like a light being switched off, and you will no longer exist, ever? If Alan Watts was right, then this is the greatest lie you have believed your entire life. Watts spoke about a simple but frightening thing. You are not afraid of death. You are afraid of losing the image of yourself, the name, the face, the story, everything you have held on to for decades. Death, according to Watts, does not destroy you. It takes away only the mask. All his life he repeated one idea in different forms. You are not a small being inside a vast universe. You are the universe itself, temporarily playing the role of me, like an actor on a stage who becomes so absorbed in the character that he forgets who he really is. And here comes the dramatic moment that literally took people's breath away during his lectures. He compared death to awakening. You lived as if you were watching a film from the first-person perspective, so realistic that you forgot you were sitting in a theater. Everything felt serious. Everything mattered. Fear, money, reputation, illness, loss. And then the film comes to an end. Credits, darkness. And then you realize that all this time you were not the character. You were the viewer, the one who was watching, the one who chose this film. Is it frightening? Yes, because it means one thing. You are far greater than the story you are used to calling yourself. Watts said that as long as you cling to the idea, I am only this body, death will feel like a catastrophe. But if you even for a single second sense yourself as something larger than the body, the fear begins to dissolve. Imagine a simple image, an ocean and a wave. The wave rises, lives, rushes forward, breaks on the shore, disappears. We are used to thinking that death is the moment when the wave breaks and everything ends. But for the ocean, nothing has ended. The water has not gone anywhere. Only the form has changed. So Watts claimed, you are not the wave. You are the ocean that creates waves, one after another, life after life, experience after experience. And here is where it becomes truly interesting. If this is so, then death is not a finale. It is a pause between roles, between lives, between dreams. He said something like this: you have already died countless times. You simply do not remember it, just as you do not remember your dreams from childhood. But what you are at the deepest level has never been born and has never died. Does it sound insane? Yes. But think about why these words sink in so easily. Why, when you hear things like this, somewhere deep inside, a strange feeling arises. I already knew this. I just forgot. Watts believed that the greatest taboo in our society is not sex and not money. The greatest taboo is knowing who you really are. His famous book is precisely about this, about the prohibition against knowing your true nature. Because the moment a person stops seeing himself as small and mortal, it becomes very difficult to control him through fear. And now comes the most uncomfortable part. If death is not the end, if you truly continue to be something, then what actually happens at the moment the heart stops? Watts did not paint pictures of heaven with golden gates. He did not frighten people with hell. He spoke about what happens inside consciousness. Imagine the final seconds. Pain intensifies, and then suddenly disappears. Sound fades. The body grows numb, but awareness does not. On the contrary, it expands, becomes calmer, quieter. It is as if you step back from your life. At first, you see yourself from the outside, the room, the people holding your hand, the doctors, the monitors. And then all of this becomes like a distant photograph, and you find yourself in that very space Watts spoke about his entire life, without form, without age, without a name, but with a surprisingly clear understanding. This is it. I have always been this. And here, according to him, something happens that we fear more than anything else. Not a judgment from outside, but an honest meeting with yourself. Not with who you appeared to be to others, but with the one who actually lived this life. With all the fear, with all the love, with all the betrayals, with the moments when you acted against your conscience, and with the moments when you chose kindness, even when you could have turned away. He said that in this state you suddenly see your entire life at once, not frame by frame, as a whole, like one vast gesture, like one long note played by you in the symphony of the universe. And here is the main question that, in his view, is asked after death, not from the heavens, but from within. Do you want to play again? Not as punishment, not as a reward, but as an invitation. Life, according to Watts, is not an exam. It is a game of hide and seek. Existence itself hides in the form of you in order to experience fear, joy, aging, love, illness, hope, and loss. Everything you spent your entire life trying to avoid is exactly what you came here for. That is why, he said, we are so afraid of death. Not because there is emptiness there, but because there is too much honesty. There, you cannot pretend. You cannot hide behind a role. You cannot say, I was just following orders, or that's how it had to be. There, you see that you were always the one making the choices. Does it sound harsh? Yes. But that is where the liberation is. Because if you imagine that this is how it truly works, life itself suddenly changes. Ask yourself honestly, if you knew that after death you would have to experience again everything you did to others, would you live differently? Be gentler, speak more truthfully, postpone less, love more. That is what Watts was hoping for. Not that people would believe him blindly, but that they would at least allow themselves to consider the thought, what if death is not a period but a comma? He suggested a very simple, almost childlike experiment. Sit in silence. Close your eyes. Imagine that you are already dead, that everything is over. This day, this room, these worries, everything you held on to can no longer be taken with you. It is too late. Feel that emptiness, that loss of control. And then ask yourself one question. If I were given one more life, how would I want to live it? Right there, in that first honest flash of an answer, your true relationship with death is hiding. He said that fear does not disappear when you find the right religion. And not when someone promises you that everything will be fine. Fear begins to dissolve when you trust yourself more than dogmas, when you are willing to look directly at the inevitable and not turn away. And yes, he openly admitted that he had no strict proof. This is important. He did not build a new church. He did not create a new cult. All he did was offer a different angle of view, not as a doctrine, as an invitation. Imagine, he said, that death is not an enemy, but a door. You are afraid to step through, but behind the door is you yourself, only without fear. Whether you believe this or not is your choice. But one fact remains. Thousands of people who listened to his lectures later admitted that after his ideas about death they were able to sleep peacefully for the first time in many years. They stopped waking up in panic. They stopped living as if every day was a step toward the abyss. They began to live as if every day were just another scene in a great performance that continues far beyond the limits of a single body. And right now, while you are listening to these words, you can do one simple thing. Look inward. Quietly ask yourself, and if I truly do not disappear, if what I am survives this night and this life, how do I want to spend tomorrow? No beautiful promises, no scare tactics, just you and this question. And if anything inside responds, even slightly, then Alan Watts hit the mark. He did not want to convince you. He wanted to wake you up. And from there, the choice is always the same. Either live the rest of your life running away from the topic of death, or use the very idea of death as a reminder that you are alive. Right now, here, in this very second. There is one more thing Watts spoke about, almost in a whisper, usually at the very end of a lecture, when the audience was already tired, when people thought he had already said the most important part. He would lift his eyes, pause, and then say, "Imagine that you have already heard all of this before, once, before birth." He claimed that the fear of death is not a fear of the unknown, it is nostalgia, very deep, for a state where there is no pain, no time, no rush, where everything is fine with you simply because you exist. You remember it every time you look at the stars, every time you sit by the ocean and cannot explain why it suddenly feels so calm, every time you hold the hand of someone you could lose. These are not just emotions. According to Watts, this is memory, a memory of having already been on the other side of fear, and of returning there again. He put it this way: you have already died countless times, and yet you are sitting here, listening, and still afraid. Isn't that funny? At first people felt offended, and then they laughed, because there was something painfully familiar in his words. He did not ask anyone to believe. He asked them to check inside, simply to remember moments when the fear of death suddenly retreated, without any clear reason. Moments when you watched a sunset and knew with absolute clarity, I will be all right even if I am gone tomorrow. What was that? Self-suggestion? The brain protecting itself? Or did that deep knowledge he spoke about surface for just a second? He never gave an answer, never. And that was his honesty. He left a semicolon so that you could finish the sentence yourself. And now, as you have listened all the way to these words, there is one simple thing you can do, very quiet, very personal. Tonight, before sleep, when that familiar anxiety begins to creep in again, do not turn away. Do not immediately turn on the television. Do not reach for your phone. Just close your eyes. Take a slow breath and say silently, if death is an awakening, I want to live the remaining part of the dream honestly, without excess drama, without a pose, just honestly, and then live as if this were true, at least for 1 week, at least for 1 day. See what changes. Will you become angrier? Unlikely. More relaxed, calmer, gentler with yourself and with others? Very likely. And if it turns out that you have become just a little more free, then perhaps there was more in Alan Watts's words about death than beautiful philosophy. The final answer, in any case, will be known only once, by each of us, for ourselves. Until then, we have a choice: to live running away from this topic, or to live with it honestly in front of our eyes, as a reminder not to postpone what truly matters for later. If any of this resonated inside you, even slightly, then you have already taken the first step toward that very awakening he spoke about. And after that, the game continues, and the next move is yours.